Hello and welcome to Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. I'm Ian Masters, and today we'll look into a number of stories and issues in the news. We'll begin with Trump threatening to sue the BBC for $1 billion in a trumped-up case like the flimsy lawsuits against his enemies Comey, James, and Senator Schiff, which in this case amounts to an editing mistake in a Panorama documentary, Trump: A Second Chance, that hardly misrepresented his January 6th call for insurrection, since we all saw what he said and what his supporters then did as they went to the Capitol and stormed it in a violent display of murder and mayhem. Joining us from the UK is John Sweeney, a writer and reporter who spent 17 years at the BBC with Panorama and Newsnight. He lived and reported in the Ukrainian capital during the 2022 Battle of Kyiv, and he's the author of 12 books, including the best-selling novel set in the war in Burma, Elephant Moon, as well as Killer in the Kremlin, a gripping and explosive account of Vladimir Putin's tyranny. And he is the host of the podcast Hunting Ghislaine, which is adapted from his book of the same title. Then, with the COP30 climate talks underway in Brazil's Amazon, absent the US and our mainstream media, we'll examine how the annual COP meetings are sabotaged from within by petrostates Saudi Arabia and Russia, and now the US, because of the requirements for consensus, not majority rule. Joining us is Michael Mann, a Presidential Distinguished Professor in the Department of Earth and Environmental Science at the University of Pennsylvania and Director of the Penn Center for Science, Sustainability, and the Media. He contributed to the award of the 2007 Nobel Peace Prize and was elected to the United States National Academy of Sciences in 2020, and is the author of numerous books, including Dire Predictions, Understanding Climate Change, The New Climate War, The Fight to Take Back Our Planet, and his latest book, Science Under Siege: How to Fight the Five Most Powerful Forces That Threaten Our World. Then finally we'll assess whether Trump wants to be like Putin or is taking orders from Putin, since, either way, he is destroying the United States at a remarkable pace. Joining us is Olga Lautman, a non-resident senior fellow at the Center for European Policy Analysis, who is also the creator and co-host of the Kremlin's File podcast series, which features expert discussions on the Kremlin's internal affairs, global operations, and tactics used from their hybrid warfare toolkit to destabilize Western democracies. She has a Substack newsletter covering Russia, Ukraine, Eastern and Central Europe, with a focus on Russia's intelligence operations, available at olgalautman.substack.com, where her latest article in her series Unmasking Russia is How Crossfire Hurricane Became a Political Litmus Test, and America's Roskvadia Moment, when Trump turns the National Guard into his own private army. And before we begin with our tax dollars paying for the bombing of innocents abroad and racist thuggery at home, as families are ripped apart and neighbors disappeared from our streets, shops, and schools, we find ourselves at a moral moment when America's better angels have to be mobilized against a cruel and corrupt regime enabled by political cowardice and judicial blindness. The only way to save our democracy from its current descent into fascism is a massive mobilization of people power against a plutocratic-funded 2026 Trump campaign of voter suppression and intimidation by masked government thugs. As Trump cowers the owners of the press and defunds public broadcasting, Background Briefing needs your support to keep providing a reality-based daily briefing that exposes the regime's malevolent machinations to protect and defend our constitutional rights and freedom of speech and assembly. We ask you to make a tax-deductible donation at backgroundbriefing.org/donate or at our foundation, publictruthmedia.org, and thank you for defending the home of the brave and the land of the free. And joining us now from the UK is John Sweeney, a writer and reporter who spent 17 years at the BBC with Panorama and Newsnight. He lived and reported in the Ukrainian capital during the 2022 Battle of Kyiv, and he is the author of 12 books, including the best-selling novel set in the war in Burma, Elephant Moon, as well as Killer in the Kremlin, a gripping and explosive account of Vladimir Putin's tyranny. And he's the host of the podcast Hunting Ghislaine, which is adapted from his book of the same title. Welcome to Background Briefing, John Sweeney.
It's a real pleasure to talk to my buddies in the United States.
Indeed. And you worked for Panorama for quite some time, and Panorama is in the hot seat. And the top person at the BBC is to step down along with the head of BBC News. Donald Trump's lawyer in Florida has given the BBC an ultimatum that by Friday they have to issue an apology along with some kind of compensation. We don't know how much that involves. Otherwise, on Friday, Trump will slap $1 billion lawsuit on the BBC, which of course would have to be funded by the British public, would it not?
Yeah, but Trump can threaten to sue the BBC and he can sue the BBC, but he has no standing in law and he won't win $1 billion. I doubt whether he'd win a single pound. It's simple. What happened was a mistake. My former colleagues in Panorama made a mistake, or rather, there was a mistake in terms of the editing. But fundamentally, what happened on January the 6th, and you all know this, everybody knows this, is that Trump got his supporters to invade the Capitol, and he made that happen. He pushed it. When the supporters got there, they were violent, people were killed, and Trump did not enough to stop it. He didn't stop it publicly. He didn't call in the National Guard in a timely fashion. We all know that. So the Panorama edit, although what happened was it was wrongly done, did not change the fundamental truth about the story, which was that Trump got his supporters to invade the Capitol on January the 6th. So the idea that this is a hurricane is nonsense. It's a storm in a teacup, Ian. A storm in a teacup. But what's happened is, I think that the Labour government here, Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, is afraid of being on the wrong side of Donald Trump because he's so, how can I put this? He's so fucking crazy. He's so much of a toddler that Starmer is afraid of being on the wrong side of Trump. And there are other issues with the current departing Director General, Tim Davie, who I think was a good boss who tried to steer the BBC in a very, very difficult time. There's a new and wonderful book which I recommend to everybody called The Hour of the Predator by a chap called Giacomo Dampoli. He's an Italian Swiss guy, very, very interesting writer. And he talks about he used to work for a moderate Italian government and met a lot of the tech bros. And what he sets out is the evidence that the far right in the States and across Europe are being empowered by the tech bros. And he describes that the world we live in now is a kind of digital Somalia. So you've got evil warlords, hyper aggressive, attacking mainstream politicians and mainstream institutions of democracy, for example, the BBC. And these institutions are hidebound by a set of rules which have grown and grown and grown and are almost helpless when they're being attacked by the digital technicals. A technical, by the way, is a pickup truck with a bloody great machine gun on the back, which can shoot down planes, can shoot at people, and there's a kind of weird discrepancy. So mainstream politicians, they find, in British boxing terms, the Queensberry rules. Lord Queensberry was a Victorian lord, I think, who set up these rules of boxing, and they're taking these rules to a fight with machine guns. And of course, the mainstream is losing or seeming to lose. And so, what's happening right now in Britain is yet another edition of this digital Somalia. So, Elon Musk, who let's remember, thinks it's appropriate to do a Nazi salute, thinks that's cool, that's okay, is something of a neo-Nazi, who's the world's richest man who owns Twitter. He's using his website to empower the attacks on the BBC. BBC Panorama, my old show, made a trivial mistake that doesn't tell a lie. They made a mistake in the editing, but there was a fundamental truth about the story they were telling, which was that Donald Trump told his supporters attack the Capitol, and so they did. So, so the idea that the head of the BBC has to fall on his sword for this, it's absurd. It's a big mistake by the British government. It smacks of appeasement, and appeasement never works.
But you said, John, that it's a storm in a teacup. It's also making a mountain out of a molehill, and that is the MO of Trump and his MAGA followers and people in his cabinet. Uh, that is what they're doing to Comey, the former head of the FBI, the former Attorney General of New York, and our senator here in California, Adam Schiff. They scour through mortgage records and come up with trivial little, not they're not even legal infractions, but they can be blown up into something that will force these people into court and spend a lot of money on lawyers. And that's an MO, and I see a similarity here.
Yeah, no, but listen, this is what Vladimir Putin does in Russia. He uses administrative law. What BBC Panorama did is a parking ticket offence. Okay, wasn't good. They shouldn't have done it, but it's not bad, and it did not fundamentally mislead the public. Donald Trump told his supporters to invade the Capitol, and so they did. That happened. That happened, no question. And what's happening here is administrative law, kind of like a little breach by the BBC of what it should have been better journalism. Good journalists make mistakes. When I was at the BBC, I made mistakes. I've left the BBC and I still make mistakes, but I have a go. The big picture is, do I distinguish between people who believe, for example, in democracy and the rule of law, and people like Vladimir Putin, who's a mass murderer and a psychopathic killer and an invader of other people's nations? I do make that distinction, and so should we all. So there is a real problem with how we're dealing now in this new world where, as I said, we're living inside a digital Somalia, and we need to hold the line. The BBC needs to man up and be steady under fire. Because if it isn't, then what's going to happen is that Britain will go the way of the United States, where this appalling set of culture wars. As Obama said once, there is no common conversation. And this is happening right now. So, for example, in Britain, as far as the polls are concerned, the most popular political party is Nigel Farage's Reform, which is currently something around 30% or more of the vote. And it's possible under our first past the post system that Nigel Farage could become our next Prime Minister in 4 years' time when the next general election is. But it's also true that something like 70% of the country think he's a bit of a con man. So there is a big divide. And the problem is that the BBC has been on a terrible attack because it's trying to hold the centre ground, trying to be fair to all sides. And it's very, very punishing. And at this critical moment, somebody did an edit of Trump whereby the edit's clumsy, but it's not fundamentally untrue. And for the British government to use this as an excuse to get rid of the head of the BBC, essentially to give Trump a victory over the BBC, that's not good. I don't know if you know, Ian, but I personally challenged Trump in 2013 about his association with a Russian-born gangster called Felix Sater. Sater went to prison for
Right.
stabbing a man in the neck with a broken off stem of a margarita glass, giving the man more than 100 stitches in the neck. Then he went to prison for a pump and dumps scam. Then Felix Sater did some kind of service for the American government, maybe the CIA, buying back stingers in Pakistan, something like this. That's what he says. He's an unreliable witness, but he ends up in Trump Tower with a business card with a Trump organization on it. He ends up with an office in Trump Tower in Manhattan. And I said to Donald Trump in 2013, Why didn't you say to this man, Felix Sater, you're connected with the mafia, you're fired? And Trump didn't like it, and Trump walked out on me. And Trump hates scrutiny. I don't like it that the BBC has actually put Trump under scrutiny. And what's happened is the British government has fired the boss of the organisation that tried to bring some proper scrutiny to Donald Trump. This is an unhappy day for British democracy.
So just in the last couple of minutes, then, what about the Guardian is carrying a story that there was a coup essentially on the BBC board, where an outsider, Michael Prescott, a Murdoch journalist, was able to get his agenda. It was first of all published in the Telegraph and then brought up in the meeting, which was characterized as an ambush for Deborah Turnus, the head of the BBC News, and Robbie Gibb, one of the people on the board that had been, he was previously the communications person for the failed Conservative Prime Minister, Theresa May. So is there something to it that they, in order to be
Yeah.
fair to the right, they put a bunch of these right wingers on the board, and the centrists on the board were pretty feckless, and the only person that really understood the news wasn't at that particular board meeting. So they essentially ambushed Turnus, and the rest is history.
Yes, I think that that story is more or less true. This is it feels like Julius Caesar. I happen to know Tim Davie, the outgoing Director General. He was a good boss. He was temporary Director General before Tony Hall in 2013. I made a BBC panorama about the Barclay twins who owned the Telegraph back then. And the then Director General killed the story. He lost his job because he'd made a terrible mistake, far worse than Tim. And Tim Davie became the temporary Director General for 3 or 4 months, and he ran our program. And I thought he was a good boss, and that's the general view of the BBC. But listen, Ian, we're in trouble. We're in trouble because the tech bros and people on the right and the far right are making all of the running, and they're weaponizing the upsetness and the dissatisfactions of ordinary people about simple things like the economy, about immigration, about globalization. They're weaponizing this, and and the result is not a better and happier and well-informed society. On the contrary, it's a society, where we'll end up is somewhere pretty much like inside Trump's dreadful mind. And it's happened in the United States, and I'm worried that Britain has made a step towards Trump's America. It's scary.
Well, John Sweeney, I thank you very much for joining us here today.
Ian, thank you very much.
And again, I've been speaking with John Sweeney, who's a writer and reporter who spent 17 years at the BBC with Panorama and Newsnight. He lived and reported in the Ukrainian capital during the 2022 Battle of Kyiv, and he is the author of 12 books, including the best-selling novel set in the war in Burma, Elephant Moon, as well as Killer in the Kremlin, a gripping and explosive account of Vladimir Putin's tyranny. And he's the host of the podcast Hunting Elaine, which is adapted from his book of the same title. And he joined us from the UK. We're going to take a brief station break and back look into the COP30 climate talks underway in Brazil's Amazon, which are absent the US and our mainstream media. Welcome back. I'm Ian Masters, and this is Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. And joining us now is Michael Mann, Presidential Distinguished Professor in the Department of Earth and Environmental Sciences at the University of Pennsylvania and Director of the Penn Center for Science, Sustainability, and the Media. He contributed to the award of the 2007 Nobel Peace Prize and was elected to the United States National Academy of Sciences in 2020, and is the author of numerous books, including Dire Predictions, Understanding Climate Change, The New Climate War, The Fight to Take Back Our Planet, and his latest book is Science Under Siege, How to Fight the Five Most Powerful Forces That Threaten Our World. Welcome to Background Briefing, Michael Mann.
Oh, thanks, Ian. Always good to be with you.
Well, thanks for joining us. And COP30 is underway in Brazil in the Amazon. COP, of course, stands for Conference of the Parties. There's an expectation that this will be a more fruitful meeting than the previous ones. They have them every year. They'll be going on for, obviously, for decades.
Yeah.
What's your sense of whether this will produce something more, given that the US TV networks are not there? Because Trump's not going. I guess they've decided not to cover it. Only the New York Times and the Associated Press are covering it. So to that extent, it's already a bit shameful.
Yeah, well, the question is always, is it going to be a good cop or a bad cop?
Right.
To sort of be half joking about it. You're right. I mean, one of the things that's frustrating is that this is literally, a last-ditch effort to stabilize the warming of the planet below truly catastrophic levels. If we don't get a significant agreement among the world's nations at COP30, it becomes almost impossible to see a scenario where we keep warming below that catastrophic level. And given the implications, given the fact that this is literally an existential threat that we're talking about and that we're dealing with, it's disturbing, right, that there's so little coverage of it in the mainstream media. Now, one of the problems, of course, is that the United States is not officially participating. There is no U.S. federal delegation. There are many states and institutions. In fact, University of Pennsylvania, my university, has two different delegations attending COP30. That's two more than the Trump administration. It's so part of the problem, of course, is that the United States, at least at the national level, at the federal level, is not engaging in good faith. And the question is, will others step in to sort of fill that vacuum, to fill that void? And there's some indication that China may want to play that role. And that's one reason for cautious optimism, that if China really steps up to the plate and brings the tremendous resources and influence that it has to bear, then there's a chance of making some substantial Congress, even with the essentially the absence of the U.S. government. One other thing that's interesting: your governor, Gavin Newsom, the California governor, is there, and in fact is calling out to the Trump administration for their absence, and that may attract some media attention as well.
Well, there's nothing more greater contrast than China's efforts racing ahead with electric cars. They're phasing out coal-fired plants. The United States is building more. Trump is pushing the coal industry to get back from its deathbed. Trump's attitude to windmills and solar, and the extent to which he's just completely ripped off everything that Biden achieved. It's hard to understand, Michael. From your point of view, it's got to be heartbreaking since you've worked so hard over these decades. He's deranged and sick about this. It's not just that he doesn't believe in global warming. He's aggressively trying to turn back the clock at the expense of everybody on this planet.
That's absolutely correct. He is doing the bidding of a small number of bad actors, basically the plutocrats that put him in power, the Koch brothers, who own the largest privately held fossil fuel company, petrochemical company in the world. He's doing the bidding of the fossil fuel industry, ExxonMobil, other fossil fuel, coal, natural gas. and coal, natural gas, and petroleum oil interest in the U.S. And that was codified in Project 2025. If you read this document, which the Republicans and Trump attempted distance themselves from, but in fact it was the blueprint that was written by these bad actors, by the Heritage Foundation, the Koch brothers, the fossil fuel industry. It was this blueprint going, for a second Trump term. And the idea was that a Republican Congress and Trump would work together to dismantle all of the, all of the progress that we've made, all of the infrastructure for moving forward on clean energy, for acting on the climate crisis. The plan was to dismantle our scientific infrastructure and our policy infrastructure for dealing with the climate crisis, because it's a threat to the bottom line of the fossil fuel industry. And so it's no surprise that Trump is proceeding in this way. It was basically, it was what was written in the blueprint by the polluters for Trump, and there was an implicit understanding that they would support him. They would support his presidency as long as he advanced their agenda, and that's exactly what he's doing.
But the fossil fuel companies, and Exxon and company, they spend a lot of money on greenwashing to make us all believe that they really care about the environment. But Trump is different. He's basically in your face saying it's all garbage, and let's drill baby drill and pollute baby pollute. So that's what is so extraordinary about him, is that then the powerful backers of Trump don't want to go forward and tell it like it is, the way that Trump does.
Yeah, I mean, well, back to the expression I used earlier in a different context: good cop, bad cop. Trump is the bad cop to the fossil fuel industries. Sort of facade of being the good cop, right? They want to present themselves to the public because, after all, they have a product that they need to sell to the public, and they have to maintain a positive public image. And so they have spent millions of dollars on, as you say, greenwash, corporate propaganda intended to make it sound like they're doing something about climate, when, behind the scenes, they're doing everything they can to sabotage climate efforts and to sabotage clean energy. And Trump, can get away with it, right? It's already built into his brand. It's built into, it's part of his appeal to his base, the fact that he's brazen, the fact that he spews this nonsense so assertively and confidently. His base eats that up. They like that. So he can get away with it, right? Whereas the fossil fuel companies have to maintain this sort of positive image. And so it literally is a good cop, bad cop routine.
So let's talk about the COP30 in Belém, Brazil, in the sense that within COP itself, for example, Mexico and Papua New Guinea have a proposal to change the rules which were set in place by the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which kicked off the yearly COP negotiations. And the Saudis and other oil-producing countries were able to basically force an agenda where it has to be a consensus as opposed to a majority vote. And a lot of people are waking up to the fact that that's been paralyzing COP, and it's essentially making it a sort of the lowest common denominator outcomes.
Yeah, well, in fact, my colleague Susan Joy Hassel and I wrote an op-ed about this 2 years ago for COP28 in the Los Angeles Times, and it was about precisely that. It was about how the COP process has basically become broken, and part of the problem is that all it takes is one or two bad actors, like Saudi Arabia, like Russia, and the United States, unfortunately, is now part of that coalition of the unwilling, as I like to call it, this coalition of petrostates that has blocked any meaningful action, and they essentially have veto power. So the strongest agreement that can get through is an agreement that Saudi Arabia and Russia have agreed to. And obviously that means that nothing, useful will come out of this process from a policy perspective. Nothing that actually has the potential to seriously move us away from fossil fuels towards renewable energy is going to be approved by petrostates like Russia and Saudi Arabia. So the process is broken. Susan and I in that op-ed argued that there should be something like a two-thirds. Two-thirds of the participating nations agree to something, it's passed. That's a reasonable standard. This idea that you need 100% consensus is an unreasonable standard. It basically is a blank check to bad actors who want to gum up the process and prevent any meaningful progress.
But that's what they've done, haven't they, Michael?
Yeah, that's exactly what they've done, and the rules have to be changed, and that's what Susan and I argued, and I think there is growing awareness that the rules have to be changed. This is unacceptable.
So what do you think about the Mexico-Papua New Guinea proposal? Is there any way that this broken system can be fixed?
Yeah, I don't know in terms of the bylaws of the UN Framework Convention. I don't know precisely what mechanisms there are for changing those rules. I believe it's a pretty high bar. Obviously, it isn't just a few countries that can institute those changes. There has to be quite widespread support to change the rules, but I don't know what the precise standard actually is.
Well, then isn't it incumbent on all of us, as much as we are appalled by Trump and by the absence of the US at COP, and also the absence of the US mainstream media at COP, particularly the television networks? On the one hand, that's shameful, but on the other hand, we have to be realistic about the fact that the bad actors like Russia, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and unfortunately the United States are making this whole process meaningless.
Yeah, absolutely. And I very quickly looked up the bylaws here. And so, any party to the convention can propose an amendment, and that's what's happened here. That's communicated to all parties at least 6 months. That's happened. The parties attempt to reach a consensus on the amendment. That's not going to happen because of Russia, Saudi Arabia, the U.S. Because consensus cannot be reached, the amendment can be adopted as a last resort by a 3/4 majority vote of the parties present and voting. So that could happen. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with that amendment. If there are enough countries there that are willing to change the rules to prevent the ability of one bad apple to spoil the whole thing.
Well, I think Lula, the host, he gets it, doesn't he?
Yeah, he does. It was, he took some really important actions. He campaigned on, obviously needing to do something about rainforest destruction, the destruction of the Amazon, which contributes to carbon emissions and obviously makes the whole problem even worse. And so, Brazil has an important role, not just because they are a fossil fuel driven country, but also because of the fact that they control a large part of the Amazon rainforest, and so when it comes to natural carbon solutions, they play an important role there as well. And so, yeah, I think that Brazil, I think Lula is engaging constructively here. China is engaging constructively. The EU. There are enough countries that still appear to want to do something about this problem that we might see some progress here. And if the only thing that comes out of COP30 is a recognition that the rules have to be changed, and there's an effort to do that, then something important will have happened here.
Well, just in closing, Michael, the next COP, of course, Australia is vying for the host country, but
Right.
so is Turkey, and Erdogan,
Yep.
of course, being this sort of boneheaded dictator, is digging
Yeah.
his heels in. Australia's, they're much more aware of climate change in Australia, in spite of the Murdoch press that dominates Australian media.
Yeah.
But they also have I think, one of the worst carbon footprints per capita on the planet.
Yeah, it's a bit of a contradiction. I spent some time down there. I was actually down in Australia for the Black Summer when, when those fires, those wildfires, raged across the continent in early 2020, and it really raised awareness about the climate crisis for Australians. And I got to meet a whole bunch of them, including some, leading politicians and policymakers in Australia, some of the investment fund managers. They have some of the largest superannuation funds in the world. And I was impressed. I think the people of Australia get it. I think a lot of their policymakers want to do something here. But you're right. There is also an entrenched fossil fuel interest, and there are bad actors. The Murdoch press, as you mentioned, has been working with fossil fuel interests in Australia to do everything they can to block progress, even as the Australian people themselves clearly want to move forward. And there's some success stories there. South Australia, the state of South Australia, now derives much of its energy from renewables, from solar energy in particular. And so it's almost a model for what the rest of Australia could do and for what the rest of the world could do. So, I see in Australia some real potential, but there are still some entrenched fossil fuel interests that are doing everything they can. And even the Labor government, which normally one would expect to support environmental actions and environmental preservation, has been compromised to some extent by those entrenched fossil fuel interests. And that's why climate advocates in Australia are not very happy even with the progressive Labor government that they currently have. Even they are amenable to being swayed and compromised really by entrenched fossil fuel interests. So that's a battle that's still playing out there. Maybe having COP there would be constructive. It would allow the sort of the climate proponents in Australia to it would provide them with a forum and command international attention for Australia's role in addressing this crisis.
Well, Michael Mann, I thank you very much for joining us here today.
Thank you, Ian. Always a pleasure.
Well, thank you, Michael. And again, I've been speaking with Michael Mann, who's the Presidential Distinguished Professor in the Department of Earth and Environmental Science at the University of Pennsylvania and Director of the Penn Center for Science, Sustainability, and the Media. He contributed to the award of the 2007 Nobel Peace Prize and was elected to the United States National Academy of Sciences in 2020, and is the author of numerous books, including Dire Predictions, Understanding Climate Change, The New Climate War, The Fight to Take Back Our Planet, and his latest book is Science Under Siege, How to Fight the 5 Most Powerful Forces That Threaten Our World. We're going to take a brief station break and back assessing whether Trump wants to be like Putin or is taking orders from Putin, since either way, he is destroying the United States at a remarkable pace.
Don't it always seem to go that you don't know what you've got till it's gone? They paved paradise, put up a parking lot. They took all the trees, put them in a tree museum, and they charged the people $1.50 just to see them. Don't it always seem to go that you don't know what you've got till it's gone? They paved paradise, put up a parking lot.
Welcome back. I'm Ian Masters, and this is Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. And joining us now is Olga Lautman, a non-resident senior fellow at the Center for European Policy Analysis, who is also the creator and co-host of the Kremlin File podcast series. She has a Substack newsletter covering Russia, Ukraine, Eastern and Central Europe, with a focus on Russia's intelligence operations, available at olgalautman.substack.com, where her latest articles in her series Unmasking Russia is How Crossfire Hurricane Became a Political Litmus Test. And she has another article, America's Roskvadia Moment, when Trump turns the National Guard into his own private army. Welcome to Background Briefing, Olga Lautman.
Thank you for having me.
Well, thanks for joining us, Olga. And since you follow Russian politics and the Kremlin's activities, and particularly the Russian intelligence services, and of course, Putin being from the KGB, it is a security state run by a former intelligence officer. What's going on with the Foreign Minister Lavrov? Is that just a storm in a teacup, a nothing burger? Or did something happen there to speculate that he had a falling out with Putin.
It does seem like there was some kind of a falling out, or at least it was meant to send the message that there was a falling out. Lavrov reappeared on Sunday with a
Yeah.
statement that he was
Yeah.
ready to sit down with Marco Rubio. But it is interesting that he was, absent very publicly from two major events, one including Putin discussing Russia testing nuclear weapons in response to Trump's latest statements that he made. So it definitely the Kremlin wanted people to know that, something, or speculate that Lavrov had fallen out from the inner circle. Chances are there may have been something because, the Kremlin isn't pleased at the direction things are going with the United States. They figured it would be much easier. But, when it comes to Russia, it's better to focus on what they're actually doing than, these signals that they send here and there to kind of like throw us all off.
So let me just quote from your article, America's Roskvadia Moment, when Trump turns the National Guard into his own private army. In 2016, Vladimir Putin created Roskvadia, Russia's National Guard, to centralize control over domestic security forces and shield the regime from disloyalty within other ministries. The force, more than 300,000, and drawn from riot police and special units, answers directly to him. Its mission was never national defense, but regime preservation, suppressing protests, intimidating dissenters, and ensuring that no challenge could rise from within. So we have, instead of Putin, of course, we have Donald Trump and his right-hand man, Stephen Miller, and they're running this ICE operation through the Department of Homeland Security that has the ICE Barbie figurehead, Kristi Noem, who's a complete joke, and her boyfriend really runs it, Corey Lewandowski. He's also a MAGA zealot like Trump and Stephen Miller. So the comparisons are totally accurate. He hasn't got to 300,000, but he's building up ICE as quickly as possible. And they are basically a bunch of untrained thugs loyal to Trump. So where do you think this is heading?
Well, you have two components to this. One, you have ICE and Border Patrol, which really have become lawless. I mean, and the latest, even a Chicago judge, had the head of Border Patrol admit that he fabricated, a threat in order to use violence and tear gas against protesters. So you have the component with ICE and Border Patrol who are acting lawless. Trump is building them up, unexperienced. They are hiring, in ways we have never seen before, with little training, and we've seen their capabilities and how willing they are, how far willing they are to go against suppressing dissent. On the other hand, you have our National Guard, and there was a report that the Pentagon has ordered 23,500 troops from all 50 states to be prepared for basically riot control and to deal with civil unrest. Now, this is not the main thing of the National Guard. They normally are used, for disaster response. And the fact that he is not only expanding the deployment of National Guard across, American cities, but the fact that they are suddenly preparing this 23,500, force within the National Guard to be ready for civil unrest in two waves. One wave has to be ready by January 1st. The other wave has to be fully prepared for riot control and be operational by April 1st. This is what worries me also because we have midterms coming up, next year, and what is the purpose? We are not seeing any riots or insurrections or rebellions anywhere in, across America. And we've seen the courts even point out that Trump is literally manufacturing, I mean, pulling out of thin air these crises that do not exist. And then using these, lies that he creates to say there's a rebellion or an insurrection somewhere to, send in forces and occupy American cities. And I think Chicago and Los Angeles were just the beginning of this, and this will expand across the country and expand, I mean, more than just immigration enforcement. This is being built to suppress dissent. And specifically, the timing worries me because this is being done ahead of the midterms.
Well, Trump was just on Friday in the Oval Office with the kleptocratic dictator of Hungary, Viktor Orban, who's basically Putin's bagman. And he's sitting there next to Orban, who, of course, he says is a great guy and highly respected, which, of course, is ludicrous since he's despised by all the European nations, who he shakes them down for EU subsidies, which all of which goes to him and his family. And of course, he's gerrymandered the country into, he got 45% of the vote, but 91% of the parliament. So there's the math to tell you about what a gerrymanderer he is. And that's what Trump was saying. He's saying the Republican senators have got to get rid of this filibuster so that way we'll win the next terms and we'll win the midterms and the general elections from now on. So he's already said it as clear as day. So the intent is there. Can he get away with it? Can he, if he's put the pieces in place, he's got this idiot Hegseth who'll do anything he wants. So he's already got the National Guard and these ready reaction forces that you just mentioned. You've got ICE and Border Patrol and DHS. So does he have all of the pieces in place?
So the interesting part is he does have all the pieces. And also, let's not forget in March, he did sign executive orders to start dismantling elections. They have literally, threatened every single state to hand over voter rolls, which this is being challenged in courts. And they want to federalize elections. They've attempted to seize voting machines. You also have, one of the MAGA people who actually bought the voting machines that were in dispute. That Fox News created a whole conspiracy around last in the 2020 election that they ended up paying upwards of close to what $750 million for their conspiracies and lies. So he is taking all the steps to do this. Now, as I always say, it is up to the people, because no matter the amount of rigging he will attempt to do between gerrymandering, between National Guard intimidation, threatening election officials, it is up to the people. And if the American people in mass numbers come out to vote against this, to push back, this will override any kind of attempts that they have. And I'll tell you a funny story. Around 2019, there were elections in Russia. And at that time, Navalny was running, a campaign to make sure that everyone votes for any party except United Russia, which is Putin's party. Um, the surge in a few places was so overwhelming that even Russia, who is experts of hateful and controlling not only the election results, but what the results will be, how much they will win by, even there, in a few of the districts, the mass voting actually managed to flip a United Russia seat. So that's why I say it's possible for us, and it just depends on the American people, because the more people that show up, and show they are not intimidated, the more we have a chance of, reclaiming our democracy and at least putting some kind of a stop by taking back the House.
Well, since you're a Russian or former Russia, I don't know, is that the right way to put it?
Well, I'm
You,
Ukrainian and Russian, I'm both.
right. Well, you bring a perspective of somebody that's seen it actually happen. And as you write in your article that we're discussing, Olga, the United States is drifting towards the institutional model of its adversaries, a militarized surveillance state under a leader who equates criticism with betrayal. So Trump has always admired Putin, I think, because he's supposedly the richest man in the world. And Trump is rapidly trying to emulate him and steal as much money as he can by monetizing his presidency. He's absolutely never criticized him. He gets rolled by him every time he meets with him, and he threatens sanctions and then immediately backs away. And the latest one, of course, was on the giving the Ukraine cruise missiles, which he's now backed away on. And now he's given Orban a 1 year exemption from sanctions on Russian oil. I'm not sure how Hungary's going to get the oil and gas because the pipelines cross Ukraine. What do you know about that?
Well, I mean, Ukraine is going to continue pushing back against Hungary. It'll be interesting to see, what happens there because Ukraine has made it very clear that they do not support, Orban continuing to get Russian gas, and they have put a stop to both Hungary and Slovakia. It'll be interesting to see which way this goes. And at the same time, Ukraine also has stepped up its attacks on Russia's oil refineries, which basically they're, carrying out the correct version of sanctions, implementing sanctions since the West failed, because not only are there gas shortages inside of Russia, but this takes away, key revenue from Russia for its genocidal war. And as far as with Trump, absolutely, he made it clear the first term around. I mean, I remember in 2016 and 17 warning that Trump wants to, create the same type of system in the United States, like in Russia, where he gets to control everything. He can siphon America's resources. He can put, his hands into every single corporation that he wants to. Um, he can disappear people, quash protest. And we saw this during the first term. I mean, it was during the George Floyd protests that Trump, said, asked whether he can use the military to just shoot these protesters because, he didn't want them in front of the White House. At that time, there were guardrails. The problem is that he was out of the White House for 4 years and basically, studied every single thing that was a guardrail to him, and this time came back prepared. Literally, the minute he was sworn in, he was already signing executive orders to purge people from, various agencies and anyone who could be a block to his power. And so this time, I mean, we are seeing it. I mean, this is not the FBI, the Department of Justice. These aren't recognizable agencies that you and I know for decades. I mean, you see, they were clearly weaponized and under the control of the White House to go after whomever Trump wakes up in the morning and decides, is his next target.
Well, Trump has already dismantled our democracy and our government. He's undermined our rule of law. He's destroyed our educational systems. He's attacked science while rewarding ignorance. He's weakened and divided our military, and he's unleashed his private militia against U.S. citizens and non-citizens. He's eviscerated our intelligence and our counterintelligence. He's trashed our alliances. He's undercut the primacy of the dollar with crypto scams and his tariff chaos. He's plundered our environment. He's poisoned our future. He's impoverished most Americans, except for the billionaires. And now he's starving 1 in 8 of us So how in God's name does he have any support in this country? So the only way he's going to stay in power is to follow Putin's model. And you were just saying that Navalny was getting so many votes that they even overcome the vote rigging. So this is,
And it wasn't Navalny getting the votes. Navalny launched a system to vote for any party at the time other than United Russia to dilute the vote. And it,
right.
worked in a few regions. It actually, um,
Well,
Russia's Kremlin thugs couldn't keep up, and, and the actual real results came in.
right.
But here we saw Tuesday what happens when our Americans are pissed off. They brought him back for whatever reason um into power, but clearly we thought, everyone is angry. And you saw it from the turnout. I mean, even in Mississippi, Democrats ended up he call it gaining some kind of power. Georgia, across the whole country, and the numbers of people who came out to vote was impressive. So
Mm.
I think if Trump continues delivering, his hell for all of us, it will take people to go out and vote. I mean, we're going to need to vote. We need to strategize and do everything to push back against this regime because, I mean, he has done so much damage. He's done actually what it took Putin maybe 11, 12 years to do. He's done in like 8 months, so this is why it's so important for people here to strategically organize to push back. And we need to make sure that at least, the courts hold up, not the Supreme Court, but the regular courts hold up to slow this down and use our states because the states are also another, key in pushing back with all this federal overreach.
So just in closing, Olga, I just read off a list of what Trump has done. He is destroying America. It's happening at warp speed. It's happening before us. There's just no question about it. So is he doing that because he wants to be like Putin, or is he doing it because Putin has told him how to do it? In other words, we know he's in Putin's pocket, but maybe he's only just emulating him. But is there another possibility that he's actually following Putin's instructions?
It could be a combination of both. I think it could be a combination of both because the fact that, he has long ties to Russia going back to Soviet days and that, he has 40 plus years of dealings with Russian mafia, Kremlin linked officials, Russian intelligence operatives. I mean, for 40 years, he's been in that sphere. And there's a part of him that, will do things to advance Russia's agenda, just as he did during the first term. This time, he's not even bothering to hide it, especially when it comes to Ukraine or attacking our alliances like NATO. And we just pulled out, troops from Romania and a drawdown by the Pentagon as Russia is escalating across NATO, against NATO countries. And then part of it is I think he wants to emulate Putin because he likes that power, like that mafia style power, where he is immune to everything, immune to investigations. If journalists are investigating him in Russia, Putin all he has to do, he doesn't even have to complete a sentence, just mention and say this is needs to be taken care of, and that's it. And the journalist is dead or jailed. So Trump loves that type of, mafia style raw power, where he can steal everything, con everyone, and at the same time, have no accountability whatsoever. So I think it's a combination.
Well, Olga Lautman, I thank you very much for joining us here today.
Thank you.
And again, I've been speaking with Olga Lautman, who's a non-resident senior fellow at the Center for European Policy Analysis, who's also the creator and co-host of the Kremlin File podcast series. She has a Substack newsletter covering Russia, Ukraine, Eastern and Central Europe. It's available at olgalautman.substack.com, where her latest article is How Crossfire Hurricane Became a Political Litmus Test. She has another article, America's Roskvadia Moment, when Trump turns the National Guard into his own private army. And this has been Background Briefing. I'm Ian Masters, and I'd like to thank producers Graham Fitzgibbon, Sasha Linden Cohen, and Asher Price. If you missed any of today's program or would like to explore our vast archives, you can find us at backgroundbriefing.org, where we include extended interviews searchable by topic and have made it easier for you to sign up for daily email updates that provide links to resources, articles, and books discussed on the program. Also, you can find links there to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and we highly encourage your ratings and reviews on those platforms. Find us on Twitter and Facebook, as well as also now on Blue Sky at Ian Masters Media. And please do help us reach more listeners by sharing the program with friends, family, and colleagues. And to help us sustain this program into the future and ensure it remains free to all, please take a moment to support us by going to backgroundbriefing.org/donate, where your tax-deductible donations, large and small, keep us broadcasting. And I'll be back again tomorrow with another Background Briefing, and I'm always available at backgroundbriefing.org. Bye for now.